The wind howled through the barren plains of Taraz, kicking up the red dust that coated everything in sight. Captain Elena Martinez stood at the edge of the colony's central hub, staring out into the desolate expanse. Taraz was a planet of extremes, harsh winds, brutal sun, and endless stretches of rocky desert. Yet for humanity, it was the last hope. The Galactic Council had turned its back on Earth, leaving humanity to fend for itself in the far reaches of space. Despite the hostile environment, Elena had always believed in the strength of human resilience. But this was different. This was the beginning of something new, a fresh start, a chance to prove that humanity could thrive even in the face of abandonment. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Xylek, a member of the Vexa species who had chosen to help the humans despite the risks. His tall, graceful figure emerged from the shadows, his dark eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and concern. The Vexa were a peaceful species, deeply rooted in tradition, and yet here they were, standing beside humans in the hope of building something together. "You should rest," Xylek said, his voice soft but firm. "The colony needs you fresh." Elena turned and smiled faintly. "I know, but I can't shake the feeling that we're not just building a colony here, we're building something much bigger." Xylek nodded, sensing her unease. "You are building a new world, Elena, one where people can choose their own destiny." Her thoughts drifted as she glanced at the half-built structures rising from the rocky terrain. The colony was a patchwork of makeshift buildings, large cargo containers repurposed into living quarters, and temporary workshops where humans and aliens worked side by side. The central hub was just beginning to take shape, a symbol of what could be. But there were obstacles. The Dracarians, one of the most powerful and aggressive factions in the galaxy, had already made their position clear. They wanted Taraz for themselves, and they would stop at nothing to take it from the humans. Elena's gut told her that the Dracarians were only the beginning. She had no idea how long they would be able to hold their ground before the galaxy's true enemies came to collect their debt. "We're almost there," Elena said, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her insides. "Just a little more time, and we'll have a solid foundation to build on." Xylek hesitated, then spoke in a tone that conveyed something deeper. "And what happens after that? Once the colony is secure, what do we do next? The galaxy is vast, and the Council, they have forgotten you." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She had often wondered what came next. If they managed to survive Taraz's dangers, would they be forced into isolation forever? Would the galaxy come knocking when they were ready, only to realize that humanity had already found a new way? "I'm not worried about what the galaxy thinks anymore," Elena said finally, her voice stronger than before. "We'll build what we need here, and when the time comes, we'll be ready. But we need to start with trust. Trust between us, the Vexa, and anyone else who wants to stand with us." Xylek studied her carefully. "Trust is difficult. Our people, our species, have a long history of relying on our own strength, not on others. It is not easy to break from that tradition." "I know," Elena said, "but the truth is we need each other. We've always relied on each other, even when it felt like we were all alone." As Xylek turned to leave, Elena stood for a moment longer, looking out over the horizon. It was a bleak landscape, but in that moment she saw something else. She saw the possibility of what could come. The idea that humanity, when forced to rely on nothing but its own ingenuity and compassion, could build something stronger than the empire of the stars. Later that day, the day passed in a blur of activity. Elena supervised the installation of the last of the defensive shields, the energy grid, and the first steps of human habitation in the central hub. The workers, humans and Vexa alike, moved with purpose, their determination feeding off of each other's energy. Elena saw the same drive in the Vexa as she did in her fellow humans. It was that unyielding need to survive, to thrive, that bound them all together. By evening, the central hub was nearly complete. Elena allowed herself a brief moment of respite, sitting down on one of the unfinished steps leading into the colony. Xylek appeared beside her again, this time with a small data pad in hand. "I've been monitoring the Dracarians," Xylek said quietly. "They're close, too close for comfort." Elena stood quickly, her mind shifting back to the threat at hand. "How close?" "Within range of our outer defenses. We need to prepare." A cold shiver ran down her spine. The Dracarians had been watching, waiting for humanity to grow weak. They wouldn't stop until they claimed Taraz. Elena wasn't sure what they had planned, but one thing was clear. This colony wasn't just a refuge, it was a symbol, and the galaxy didn't tolerate symbols of defiance. Get the rest of the team ready, Alina said, her voice sharp and commanding. We can't afford to wait any longer. As Xylek left to rally the others, Alina felt a sudden surge of determination. She wasn't going to let the galaxy's indifference tear down what they had started. Terra's was their home now, and she would fight to the last breath to protect it. But in the back of her mind, a question lingered. Who could they trust when even the galaxy itself had turned its back on them? That night, as Alina lay awake in her quarters, a strange transmission came through on the colony's emergency channel. It was faint at first, a garbled voice that broke through the static. Alina listened intently, her heart racing. Help Cummings not alone. The message cut off abruptly, leaving her with more questions than answers. Who was it? And why did it feel like the galaxy wasn't quite done with them yet? The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. The hum of the colony's growing infrastructure buzzed beneath the surface, but there was a palpable tension that filled the air. The Dracarians were closing in, and every sensor sweep seemed to confirm their presence on the outer edges of the system. Alina couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Captain, we've detected another Dracarian warship, Maria, one of Alina's trusted engineers, reported from the monitoring station. Her fingers moved swiftly across the touchscreen, bringing up the glowing image of a warship on the display. The ship's silhouette was monstrous, designed for battle and intimidation. Alina stood at the rear of the room, watching the feed. It had been a week since they first detected the Dracarians on the periphery, but this felt different. The warship was unlike anything they had encountered before. Its weaponry was far more advanced, and its speed was unnerving. We've got to get our defenses online faster, Alina said, more to herself than anyone else. Her thoughts were racing. The colony's shielding wasn't yet at full capacity, and their energy reserves were limited. If the Dracarians decided to attack, they'd be caught with their guard down. Xylek approached from behind, his presence calming but carrying the weight of urgency. The Dracarians are not only here for Terra's, Alina, he said, his voice low and steady. They want to establish dominance over this entire region. Terra's is just the first step. Alina turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we can't just let them take it. They'll come for Earth next if we fall. Xylek nodded. Yes, and if Earth falls, the rest of the galaxy will fall in line too. The Dracarians are not interested in treaties or negotiations. They're here to dominate. Alina clenched her jaw. The stakes were higher than she'd anticipated, but there was no turning back now. Not for her. Not for the people who had chosen to make this planet their home. We need to meet with the Council leaders. We need them to understand that we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the freedom of every species that's been oppressed by the Council's policies. And if we lose everything. Xylek looked uncertain. We can only do so much. The Vexer are not fighters by nature, but I will speak to my people. Perhaps they will stand with us if it comes to war. Later that day. The following evening, Alina and Xylek gathered in the newly constructed command center, surrounded by a small group of trusted allies. Maria, the engineer, sat at the console, her eyes glued to the glowing screen as she monitored the Dracarian warship's approach. A handful of other Vexa leaders had joined them, though their faces betrayed skepticism. They were hesitant to make any drastic moves without clear evidence of the Dracarians' true intentions. I've spoken with my people, Xylek said, his voice grave. There is support for your cause, but there is also fear. Many of my people still believe that peace can be reached with the Council, that there is no need for war, but they are willing to hear you out. Alina nodded, but her expression hardened. We don't have time for peace talks anymore. The Dracarians want us gone. It's as simple as that, and if we don't stand together now, we'll all be wiped out. Maria interjected from her station. Captain, I'm detecting an anomaly. There's a small ship entering the system. It doesn't match any known Dracarian signature. Alina's heart skipped a beat. Who is it? Maria's fingers moved quickly across the console, pulling up the unfamiliar ship's details. I'm not sure, but it's coming in hot. It's almost as if they're in a hurry. Put it through, Alina ordered. The screen flickered to life, and the figure that appeared was human, though her appearance was strained. She was clearly a survivor, her face gaunt from lack of food, her eyes wide with fear. This is Captain Lucia Ramirez of the Andromeda, the woman said in a voice that cracked with emotion. We need help. The Dracarians have been chasing us for weeks. We've lost most of our crew. They've taken our entire fleet and we barely escaped. Alina leaned forward, her mind spinning. What do you mean, taken your fleet? The Dracarians are in pursuit. Ramirez nodded weakly. They're after the refugees, all of them. They've been systematically hunting us down, but I've got something they don't know about. Something they won't expect. We were carrying important data, Captain. I don't know how much longer I can keep them off our trail, but I need sanctuary. Your colony, Terra's, it's our only chance. Alina exchanged a look with Xylek. He was just as stunned as she was. What data? Alina asked urgently. What's so important? Lucia hesitated before speaking, her eyes filled with fear. It's about the Dracarians' true plans. They're not just after resources, they've been manipulating entire star systems for decades. They've created a fleet of genetically modified soldiers, and they're going to use them to wipe out anyone who resists them. Alina's pulse quickened. She had known the Dracarians were dangerous, but this was something else. A dark realization settled in her gut. This wasn't just about surviving on Terraz. This was a war for the future of the galaxy. We'll take you in, Alina said, her voice firm. But you're going to have to share everything you know, and we need to get ready for a fight. As the transmission ended, the weight of the situation began to settle on Alina's shoulders. The Dracarians' plans were more insidious than she could have imagined. And now, the clock was ticking. The war was no longer just a possibility, it had already begun. The moment Alina closed the transmission, an alert flashed on the screen. Maria's voice cut through the silence. Captain, we've got a problem, Dracarian ships. Dozens of them, they're moving fast, and they're coming straight for us. Alina's breath caught in her throat. They had no choice now. The war was here, and there was no turning back. The Dracarian fleet was closing in faster than anyone had anticipated. Alina barely had time to process the severity of the situation before the alert sounded once again, sharper, more urgent this time. The enemy was on the move. Status update, Alina barked, her voice steady but betraying a hint of urgency as she turned toward Maria, who was frantically monitoring the incoming ships. Maria's fingers danced across the console, bringing up a series of numbers and readings. The fleet is larger than we expected, 15 ships in total. They're moving quickly, and they've already disabled our outer defenses. Xylek stepped forward, his expression strained. We have to stop them before they breach the colony's inner perimeter. If they reach the central hub, we lose everything. Alina's mind raced, the cold weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She had known this was coming, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of war. The Dracarians weren't just invaders. They were conquerors, intent on stamping out any resistance, any hope. We need every ship ready, Alina said, her voice commanding. Start prepping the Vexa fleet. We'll need all the firepower we can muster. Xylek hesitated, his dark eyes studying her. You are asking my people to fight. You know that most of us are not warriors, Alina. We are diplomats, scholars. We haven't fought a war in centuries. I know, Alina replied, her gaze unwavering. But if we don't fight now, there will be no galaxy left to save. A silence hung in the room for a moment, thick with the weight of their choices. Then, one by one, the Vexa leaders nodded. Xylek's gaze softened, a silent understanding passing between him and Alina. This wasn't just about humanity anymore. It was about the survival of every species that had been cast aside by the Galactic Council. It was about standing up for something greater than themselves. The Vexa fleet's first battle. The plan was simple: defend Terraz's inner defenses long enough to hold the Dracarians at bay and give the rest of the colony a chance to evacuate if necessary. But the Vexa fleet was no match for the Dracarians' sheer firepower. They were faster, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. Alina knew this, but it didn't make the decision any easier. Prepare for launch, Alina ordered, her hands gripping the armrests of her command chair. The screen in front of her flickered to life, displaying the fleet formation. Her ship, the Endurance, was at the center, flanked by 2 Vexa ships and a few of the human-engineered craft they'd managed to modify for combat. We can't fight them head-on, Maria said, her voice low but clear. We'll need to use the terrain to our advantage. We have the upper hand with our planetary shields, but not much else. Alina nodded. Agreed, we'll stay close to the atmosphere. They can't follow us in without risking damage to their ships. Let's lead them into the canyons. With a series of deft movements, Alina coordinated their fleet's formation. As the Dracarian ships closed in, the battle began, their weapons lighting up the void of space with deadly precision. Alina's pulse quickened as the Endurance darted through the asteroid fields, weaving in and out of narrow passages. She could feel the strain of every evasive maneuver in her bones, but it was the only option they had. The Dracarians, however, were relentless, their ships closing in on the Vexa craft. Alina's eyes darted between the display screens as the first Vexa ship was struck. Its shields flickered, then shattered under the barrage of enemy fire. "Hold them off," Alina shouted to her crew, her fingers flying over the control panel as she issued the next series of commands. "Fire everything we've got. Maria, get me that new weapon system now." Maria didn't hesitate. She worked her way through the complex network of systems, activating the new weapon they had spent days calibrating. A focused beam of energy shot out from the Endurance, striking one of the Dracarian ships. It shuddered, its shields flickering before collapsing under the intensity of the blast. The Dracarians, taken off guard by the effectiveness of the human weapon, hesitated for a brief moment. But that moment was enough. Alina seized the opportunity to fire again, taking out another Dracarian warship. The sound of the explosion rattled the crew as the ship rocked violently from the impact. "Good shot, Captain," Maria shouted, her voice full of excitement. But Alina could see the truth behind her enthusiasm. This wasn't a victory. This was only the beginning, and the Dracarians wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every last one of them. Back on Terra's, a different kind of battle. While the battle raged in space, tensions on the surface of Terra's were escalating. Alina's people had been working tirelessly to get the colony's internal defenses in place, but they were still untested. Without the advanced tech of the Dracarians, they would be vulnerable, and Alina knew it. Xylek was coordinating the evacuation from the central hub when the first Dracarian ground forces arrived. The Vexa weren't prepared for ground combat, but they fought with a quiet determination. Alina's thoughts constantly turned to the surface of Terra's, knowing that the moment the Dracarians reached the colony, it would be a massacre. "Captain," Xylek said, his voice tight over the comms. "We're being overrun. The Dracarians are too many. We need help." Alina's heart sank. They had tried to fortify the central hub as best they could, but it was still too open, too vulnerable. The Dracarians had breached their perimeter, and the Vexa forces were too few to hold them back. "We're on our way," Alina replied, her mind racing for a solution. The Endurance was still in space, and the rest of the fleet was engaged in the battle above. But the surface, there was still hope there. "We can't hold them off much longer," Xylek's voice cracked. "We need to buy time for the others to evacuate." Cliffhanger. As Alina prepared to lead a ground mission to the surface, Maria's voice cut through the static of the comm system. "Captain, you need to see this. We've got more ships incoming, and they're not Dracarians." Alina's eyes shot to the screen. A fleet of unfamiliar ships was emerging from the shadows of Terra's moons. They weren't Dracarian. They weren't even human. "They're different," Maria said, uncertainty in her voice. "But they're here, and they're heading straight for the Dracarians." Alina's breath caught. Who were these new arrivals, and could they be trusted? The new fleet appeared out of nowhere. Alina stared at the unfamiliar ships, their sleek, angular designs unlike anything she had seen before. They weren't Dracarian, nor were they human. They were something else entirely, something that felt at once both alien and familiar. "Who the hell are they?" Maria asked, her voice filled with both awe and caution as she worked to identify the incoming ships. The fleet was small compared to the Dracarian armada, but the precision of their movements was unlike any ragtag group of refugees or independent factions Alina had ever seen. The ships were clearly military-grade, each one bristling with advanced weaponry and shields that pulsed with a faint blue glow. Alina leaned forward, her fingers hovering over the controls as she tried to make sense of it. "We need answers. Open a channel. Let's see who's willing to talk." After a moment of crackling static, a voice came through the comms, calm, measured, and unmistakably alien. "This is Captain Trowell of the Skrith Fleet," the voice said, its resonance deep and slightly mechanical. "We are here to assist you." "Assist us?" Alina repeated, her eyes narrowing. "Why, and why now after all this time?" There was a brief silence before Trowell's voice returned. "We have been watching, waiting. We are the Skrith, a race of survivors, much like yourselves. We have no love for the Dracarians." Alina's heart skipped. "You've been watching us from where?" "We have been observing your conflict from a distance." Captain Tral explained. "We knew your colony would be targeted. We also know the Dracarians are trying to wipe out your species, and they are using Terras as a pawn in their game. We will not allow it." Alina's mind spun as she processed the information. The Dracarians had already dealt the humans and their allies a blow, but if the Skrith were here to help, it could change everything. But there was still a question burning in her mind. "And what do you want in return?" Alina asked, her voice cautious. "We do not seek anything in return," Tral replied. "We only seek to ensure that our enemies, the Dracarians, do not succeed. You are not alone in this fight, and we will not allow the Council to manipulate the galaxy's weak and helpless any longer." Alina's chest tightened. The implications of what Tral was saying were enormous. If the Skrith were real allies, this could be the turning point they needed to stand up against the Dracarians and the Council's corruption. "Then we'll take your help," Alina said firmly. "But understand this, our fight is our own. We won't be beholden to anyone, not even you." There was a pause before Tral responded. "Agreed, Captain. We will fight as equals, not subordinates." The battle begins, Dracarians versus Skrith and humanity. The alliance between the humans, Vexa, and Skrith solidified quickly. The Skrith fleet joined forces with Alina, taking up positions along Terra's outer atmosphere. They were a perfect complement to humanity's more rudimentary ships, sleek, fast, and heavily armed. The Vexa, though reluctant, had no choice but to commit fully to the fight. This wasn't just about Terra's anymore. This was about survival. Alina stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching the incoming Dracarian fleet as it loomed closer, their menacing silhouettes darkening the distant stars. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her. If they failed here, Terras would fall, and the galaxy would see humanity as nothing more than a footnote. "Captain," Maria's voice came through the comms, her words clipped with urgency. "The Dracarians are splitting their forces. A large contingent is pushing toward the colony's surface, but they're also forming a blockade in space. If we don't break through soon, we won't be able to defend the ground forces." Alina's mind raced. She had no illusions about the Dracarians' plans. They would obliterate the colony from above while sending ground troops to finish the job. They were playing a deadly game of chess, and right now, humanity and its allies were losing. "We can't afford a full retreat," Alina said, her voice sharp. "Prepare to launch all ships. Skrith, stay with us and make sure the blockade breaks." "We're ready," Tral responded. "We will focus on their flanks, draw their attention away from the main assault." Alina took a deep breath. "Let's move." The ground battle, the price of survival. As the fleet above engaged the Dracarians in a violent clash of energy beams and explosions, the situation on the surface of Terras grew more dire. The Dracarians had landed, their heavy assault mechs crashing through the planetary surface with terrifying force. The Vexa, despite their technological prowess, were struggling to mount any meaningful defense. Their soldiers were outmatched by the sheer size and firepower of the Dracarians' ground forces. Xylek's voice crackled through the comms, filled with distress. "Captain, we're being overrun. We need reinforcements now." Alina's blood ran cold. The ground forces weren't equipped to handle such an assault. Her mind flashed to the colony's remaining civilians, refugees from Earth, children, the elderly, all caught in the crossfire. She turned to Maria, her voice resolute. "We're heading down there, now." Maria shot her a glance. "Captain, that's suicide. The Dracarians will tear us apart before we even reach the surface." "Then we'll make sure they don't have time to destroy everything," Alina said, her tone unwavering. She turned to Xylek. "Prepare your fleet for a landing. We're going to hit them hard and fast." Xylek hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Understood. I'll ready the forces." Alina felt the weight of every decision settle upon her shoulders. She wasn't just leading a battle. She was protecting the future of humanity and every species that had stood with them. As the Endurance descended toward the surface, Alina's heart pounded. She could see the Dracarian mechs in the distance, their massive forms tearing through the landscape, burning everything in their wake. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to strike back. Cliffhanger. As Alina's shuttle made its way toward the battlefield, the ground below erupted with gunfire, lasers, and explosions. The sky above was filled with the chaos of the battle, and the Dracarian assault was in full force. But just as they were about to make their descent, a new, unexpected transmission came through. "We've got company," Maria's voice echoed in Alina's ear. Something big. The transmission flickered with static, and then a voice cut through, chilling and unmistakable. "Elena Martinez," the voice said, a cold, mechanical tone that sent shivers down her spine. "You've done well to survive this long, but your victory ends here." It was the voice of a Dracarian commander, and the battle for Taraz was about to become even more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The voice of the Dracarian commander sent a chill down Elena's spine. It was the calm before the storm, a cold, calculated tone that spoke of someone who had already won in their mind. "Elena Martinez," the voice crackled again. "You have no idea what you're up against. Your fight was always a matter of when, not if. Now it ends." Elena's grip tightened around the controls as the shuttle descended rapidly toward the surface. The skies above Taraz had become a chaotic battlefield, filled with flashes of fire as human, Vexa, and Skrith ships clashed against the overwhelming Dracarian fleet. The stakes were higher than ever, and Elena knew they couldn't afford to lose. The Endurance was now descending through thick clouds of smoke from previous airstrikes, the distant rumble of explosions shaking the shuttle. Elena's eyes flicked to the battle report. Dracarian ground forces had breached the perimeter and were advancing toward the heart of the colony. "I'm going to take them out before they get any closer," Elena muttered under her breath, determination flashing in her eyes. She wasn't going to let the Dracarians destroy everything they'd fought for, not after all the sacrifices. Maria's voice crackled over the comms, urgent. "Captain, we've detected an unusual energy signature. Something's emerging from the ground near the colony's center. It's not Dracarian, it's something else." Elena's heart raced. "Keep me updated, Maria. Whatever it is, it's not going to stop us." On the ground, the unexpected threat. The shuttle slammed into the ground with a jarring thud, and Elena was the first to unbuckle her harness. The moment the doors opened, she could feel the heat from the flames and the acrid scent of burning metal in the air. The colony's perimeter was under siege, and everything was moving too fast. "Move out," Elena shouted as she sprinted toward the makeshift battlefield. The Vexa forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, were holding their ground bravely, firing from behind crumbling structures. The Dracarians were relentless, their assault mechs cutting through the defenses with cold efficiency. Zylik was already there, leading his people with a calm resolve. He turned as Elena approached, his face etched with worry but also determination. "We're holding, but for how long, Captain?" Elena's eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in the carnage. "Not much longer unless we do something fast." A sudden explosion shook the ground beneath them. Elena's heart skipped as a plume of smoke rose from the center of the colony, where most of the civilian refugees were located. "We need to get to the civilians now," Elena shouted, her voice hoarse with urgency. As they pushed through the chaos, Elena's comms came alive with Maria's voice, breathless and panicked. "Captain, I've found something that could turn the tide, but you won't believe what it is." "What is it, Maria?" "Something ancient. The energy readings match nothing we've seen before, but it's beneath the colony. I think it's some kind of weapon, or maybe even a power source." Elena's mind raced. An ancient weapon? On a planet like Taraz, a weapon could change everything, but it could also be a trap. Still, it was their only chance. She turned to Zylik. "We need to get to that location. Can you help us dig it out?" Zylik nodded. "We'll give you cover." The two of them led the charge, but the closer they got to the heart of the colony, the more intense the fighting became. Dracarian ground forces were everywhere. Their massive mechs lumbered across the battlefield, cutting through any resistance with terrifying precision. The Dracarian commanders reveal. As Elena neared the coordinates Maria had provided, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. She could feel it in her bones. Something was coming. The energy signature Maria had detected was closer now, but it wasn't just the glow of the power source. There was something else, a presence, something ancient and powerful like a dormant beast awakening. And then, as the ground split open, the source revealed itself. A massive alien structure, half buried beneath the colony, its metal surface covered in strange, glowing runes. It hummed with power, and the very air around it seemed to shimmer with energy. Before Elena could take it all in, the voice of the Dracarian commander echoed through her comms again, far more personal this time. "You really think this is your victory?" the voice sneered, as though Elena's presence were beneath it. "That machine you've uncovered, do you even know what it is?" Alina's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? The Dracarian commander's laugh was hollow, mocking. That is the legacy of the Ancient of Ra, the creators of the Dracarian Empire. They were wiped out centuries ago, but their weapons remain. You've just unearthed one of their greatest creations. It is a weapon of mass destruction designed to obliterate entire worlds, and now it will be your demise. Alina's mind raced as the Dracarian commander's words sunk in. This wasn't just a random ancient artifact. It was a weapon, a doomsday device left behind by a long-forgotten race. She could see now that the Dracarians weren't just interested in Terras or humanity. They wanted this weapon to ensure their control over the galaxy. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. Then we'll stop it, we'll stop you. Xylek stepped up beside her, his expression resolute. Whatever it is, we can't let them have it. Alina's eyes narrowed. She didn't know how to stop the weapon, but she couldn't afford to waste any more time. The final assault, sacrifice and survival. As the Dracarian forces pushed forward, the ground rumbled with the shifting of the weapon's power. The ancient machine began to glow brighter, its alien technology coming to life with a thunderous roar. Alina didn't have much time. Maria, can you access it? Alina demanded, her voice hard. I'll try, but I can't promise anything, Maria replied. This tech is beyond anything we've seen, but I think I can override some of the systems. Alina turned to Xylek. We have to cover her. We'll hold them off for as long as we can. Xylek nodded, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. We fight together, Captain. The battle intensified as the Dracarians launched their final assault on the colony's heart. Alina and Xylek fought side by side, cutting through the enemy ranks with everything they had. The Vexa, though hesitant at first, fought with determination, knowing that this was their final stand. But the Dracarians were too many. Alina felt the pressure of the battle mounting as the ground around them became a charnel house of fire and destruction. And through it all, the ancient weapon hummed louder, its power surging. Finally, Maria's voice crackled through the comms. I've got it, it's powering down the weapon, it's shutting down. Alina didn't believe it at first. But then, the rumbling stopped, and the weapon's glow faded, leaving behind only the silent ruins of the structure. But just as Alina allowed herself a moment of relief, the skies above Terras erupted once more, not with fire, but with a new enemy fleet. A fleet unlike anything they had faced before. The voice of the Dracarian commander echoed once more through the comms, filled with venom. You may have stopped the Vra weapon, but you haven't stopped me. The real battle was only just beginning. The skies above Terras seemed to explode with light as the new fleet emerged. Alina could hardly believe what she was seeing. The ships were colossal, monstrous, smooth black behemoths, unlike any Dracarian design she had encountered. There was an eerie stillness about them, like the calm before a storm. What is that? Alina whispered under her breath, her eyes fixed on the approaching vessels. Maria's voice crackled through the comms, thick with disbelief. That fleet, those ships aren't Dracarian. They're not anything we've seen before, but they're coming straight for us. Alina's pulse quickened. She just thought they'd won, that the battle for Terras was over. But this new threat, this unknown fleet, was something entirely different. The Dracarians weren't the only enemy to worry about. A darker force had arrived. Xylek stood beside her, his expression unreadable. We don't know who they are, but I can sense their purpose. This is not just an attack, it's a reckoning. They're coming to finish what the Dracarians started. Alina's gut tightened. Then we won't let them finish it. A surprising offer. As the new fleet drew closer, a voice that wasn't from the Dracarians or their mysterious fleet broke through the chaos on the comms. This is Ambassador Talon of the Solari Confederation. We have come to offer you an alliance. Alina's hand froze over the comms console. A voice, civilized, calm, and human. Who is this? Alina demanded, her heart racing. And why should we trust you? We are not your enemies, the voice continued, unperturbed by the suspicion in Alina's tone. We are the Solari Confederation, a group of humans who have long been in hiding from the Council. Our fleet is here to aid you. Alina felt a cold sense of relief mixed with caution. Why now? Why after everything? Ambassador Talon's voice softened. We have been watching you, Captain Martinez, and the time has come for us to stand with you. We know what the Dracarians are trying to do, what they've been doing to your people. The Solari Confederation was formed to fight back, to offer sanctuary to those who have been oppressed. Your fight has now become our fight. The words hit Alina like a blast of cold air. A new faction of humans, an underground resistance to the Council, the very people who had abandoned them. It sounded too good to be true, yet there was a sincerity in the ambassador's voice that she couldn't ignore. "We're listening," Alina said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "You are not alone," Talon said. "We have been gathering resources and ships for years. We've been organizing in the shadows, building a force strong enough to challenge the Council's oppression. Together, we can break the stranglehold of the Dracarians and the Council." Alina's mind raced. She had spent so long fighting for the survival of Terras, and now, it seemed, the entire galaxy was on the brink of change. If these Solari were as powerful as they claimed, they might just be the allies they needed. "Can you help us with the fleet?" Alina asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "We are already on our way to engage the Dracarians," Talon said. "But you will need to prepare. Your people are strong, Captain, you've proven it. But now you must trust us, because the true enemy has yet to reveal itself." The Solari intervention. Within hours, the Solari fleet arrived in full force. As their ships moved into the battle space, Alina stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching with awe as their massive vessels took positions beside her own fleet. The Solari ships were larger than anything she had seen, bristling with advanced weaponry and shields that glowed with an almost ethereal blue light. But it wasn't just their ships that filled her with a sense of hope. It was the humanity she saw in their faces, the same determination to protect their home and their people that she felt deep down. The Solari weren't just fighters, they were survivors like humanity itself. The first wave of Dracarian ships advanced, their weapons firing in a lethal barrage aimed directly at Terraz's defenses. Alina felt the tremor of each impact deep within her bones, but her focus remained sharp. It was time for the final push. "Skrith Fleet," Alina called out over the comms. "We need you to flank the Dracarians, take out their rear formations." Captain Trowell's voice responded almost immediately. "Understood, Captain. We'll make them regret underestimating us." The battle above Terras intensified as the Skrith and Solari fleets engaged the Dracarians, drawing them into a pincer movement. Alina watched as the Dracarians began to falter under the unexpected pressure. Their ships were powerful, but they had never encountered such a coordinated force. And then the Solari ships fired, launching a salvo of energy blasts that struck at the heart of the Dracarian blockade. Their shields flickered and began to fail, one by one. For the first time in the battle, the Dracarians were on the defensive. "Now's our chance," Alina shouted to her crew. "All ships break through, hit them with everything we've got." The Endurance surged forward, followed by the rest of the human and Vexa forces, now emboldened by the unexpected reinforcement. Alina watched as their weapons raked across the Dracarian ships, each blast tearing through their armor with devastating precision. For the first time in the battle, Alina allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. But as they fought, something else began to happen. The Dracarian ships, battered and bruised, retreated toward the far side of the battlefield. It wasn't a simple retreat. It was a tactical withdrawal, as if they were preparing for something much larger. "What's going on?" Alina muttered, her heart pounding. "They're not done." Suddenly, the sky above Terras shifted, and a massive shadow loomed overhead. Alina's eyes shot to the screen, her breath catching in her throat. From beyond the Dracarian fleet, a new enemy emerged, vast and unknowable. A gigantic warship, far larger than anything the Dracarians had ever deployed, materialized from the void, its hull black and shimmering with an ominous energy. It was more than a ship. It was a weapon, a war machine the likes of which Alina had never seen. Alina's voice cracked as she looked up at the screen. "What in the galaxy is that?" A voice, far colder than anything they had heard before, spoke through the comms. "This is the Sovereign of the Vra. You have overstayed your welcome." And just like that, the true battle began. The massive warship that now loomed above Terras, the Sovereign of the Vra, cast a long shadow over the battlefield. Its appearance was like a nightmare come to life. Dark, angular, and seemingly indestructible, the ship pulsed with an eerie energy, unlike anything Alina had ever encountered. The strange energy signature from earlier was now unmistakable. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a harbinger of doom. "This is it," Alina muttered to herself. "We've just woken up the real enemy. Maria's voice crackled over the comms, almost drowned out by the chaos of battle. Captain, that ship. It's not just a weapon, it's alive, the energy readings. They're beyond anything we've ever seen. If we don't stop it, Terras won't survive this. Elena's eyes darted to the screen as the Dracarians, momentarily stunned by the arrival of the Sovereign, began to regroup. They were no longer fighting to conquer. They were fighting to survive, caught in the shadow of the ancient weapon they had unleashed. Xylex's voice echoed through the comms, his tone grim. The Vrah were the ancestors of the Dracarians. If what we've heard is true, that ship holds the power of their entire empire. It is capable of annihilating planets. Elena clenched her fists. She had led humanity and its allies this far, but now they were facing an enemy beyond anything they had imagined. She turned to Maria, her mind already formulating a plan. Can we disable it? Anything. Maria hesitated, then responded, I've been scanning it. The ship's energy core is heavily shielded. There's no way to get a clear shot without damaging the entire planet. But I think I can bypass the shields if I get close enough. Elena's heart raced. How close? Close, Maria replied, her voice steady. Too close. I'll need time, Captain. We're talking minutes, not hours. Elena turned toward Xylex. We're running out of time. We need to buy Maria those minutes. Xylex nodded, determination in his eyes. We fight then, together. The desperate fight. As the battle raged on, the Sovereign of the Vrah hung in orbit, casting a menacing glow across the sky. Elena watched from the bridge of the Endurance as her fleet tried to hold off the Dracarians, but the true force of the Sovereign was clear. Its weapons weren't just aimed at the ships, they were aimed at Terras itself. Hold them off, stay focused, Elena shouted, her voice carrying over the din of the chaos. Maria's voice came over the comms, calm but filled with urgency. I'm close, I need another minute. Elena glanced at the screen. Dracarian ships were converging on their position, aiming for the heart of the colony. The ground forces were still fighting, but they were stretched thin, unable to keep up with the overwhelming onslaught. I'm sending in reinforcements, Maria. Hang in there, Elena said, her voice tight with resolve. We'll make sure you get the time you need. Xylex's voice came through the comms just as Elena was about to issue new orders. Captain, the Dracarians are preparing for a full assault on the colony's core. We can't stop them all. We need to hit the Sovereign now. Elena's mind raced, weighing the options. If they took out the Sovereign, they might stand a chance. But the Sovereign was more than a ship. It was the key to the Dracarians' power. Destroying it could destroy everything. Suddenly, Elena had an idea. Xylex, can you use the Vexa's energy systems to amplify our weapons? She asked, her voice sharp with purpose. If we hit it with everything we have, maybe we can disable the Sovereign. Xylex's eyes flickered with understanding. It's possible, but we'll need to make sure we strike at the core. One shot, that's all we get. Then we'll make it count, Elena said, as the weight of their final push settled on her shoulders. She turned to Maria. How much time do you need? I'm in position, Maria replied. But it's now or never, Captain. Elena took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. Let's do this. The final assault. The Endurance surged forward, with Xylex's ships flanking the Dracarians' forces to give them the opening they needed. The Sovereign loomed overhead, its terrifying presence almost suffocating in its magnitude. Elena's hands tightened around the control panel as she watched Maria's progress. Now, Maria's voice was strained, her fingers flying over the console. I've bypassed the shields. You have 10 seconds before they react. Elena barked her orders. All ships concentrate fire on the Sovereign's core, full power now. The entire fleet, both human and Vexa, launched everything they had at the Sovereign. A stream of energy blasts collided with the ship, each one a desperate attempt to cripple its power. Elena watched as the ship's energy core flickered, then stabilized, just for a moment. But then Maria's bypass kicked in and the shields began to flicker. In that brief moment, Xylex gave the order, and the Vexa ships unleashed their most potent weapons, channeling their energy through the Endurance's cannons. The combined force hit the Sovereign with a deafening explosion. The massive warship shuddered, its hull cracking as the energy core detonated. The Sovereign was still standing, but barely. The battle had reached its peak, and every ship in the fleet poured their remaining energy into the crippled vessel. And then it happened. The Sovereign's engines flared with a blinding light. Elena held her breath, watching in disbelief as the ship began to break apart. The blast that followed lit up the heavens like a supernova, throwing debris across the battlefield. It was as if the Sovereign had never existed, just a flash of energy and fire in the vacuum of space. Victory and hope. The Dracarians, caught off guard by the loss of their most powerful weapon, began to retreat. The tide of battle shifted, the human, Vexa, and Solari forces pressing forward with renewed strength. The skies above Terras were filled with the sounds of victory, ships firing, debris floating in space, and the retreating Dracarian fleet. As Alina stood on the bridge of the Endurance watching the last of the Dracarian ships flee, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The Sovereign was destroyed, and Terras was safe, for now. Maria's voice broke through her thoughts. "We did it, Captain. The Sovereign is gone." Alina looked out at the wreckage, her eyes narrowing with quiet determination. "We've won today, but the galaxy is still watching. The Council will come after us again. We can't stop now." Xylex's voice came through, his tone somber yet hopeful. "But we've proven something. We're not alone, Alina. The galaxy may have abandoned us, but we've built something new here, a place where every species can stand together." Alina nodded, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "This is just the beginning. Together we'll change the galaxy." As the final remnants of the battle faded into silence, Alina's gaze lifted to the stars. The fight wasn't over, but they had won something more valuable than any victory. They had created a future where no one would be cast aside again. And for the first time in a long time, Alina allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of it.